Hello everyone. So in this last video on the Milesians and on Anaximenes, I'll try and summarize the big achievements of the Milesians as understood by generations of historians of philosophy. And but before that, let me just sort of finish with talking about the place of Anaximenes. Anaximenes was the last of the great Milesians. We have other Ionians that we think of, and we will that we speak of. We'll speak of Heraclitus, and we'll speak of Xenophanes, who did migrate. But so we'll talk of other Ionians later, and we will look at the kind of fairly sort of interesting natural philosophy, and further than natural philosophy, the fairly interesting ideas that they developed, and the leaps of thought, the leaps of imagination that they made. But with Anaximenes, we have this sort of nice sort of conclusion of the initiation of this kind of thinking that we will talk about, which we think of as characterizing the Milesians. You can see the influence, if you want to think about the relation to Thales, you can see the influence of Thales and the desire to find this one single substance and to understand sort of, and this one single physical substance, natural substance, the desire to find an explanation in nature for understanding, the different sort of phenomena that we can find in nature, and for understanding the processes of change and generation and destruction. And you can see the influence of Anaximander, not just in the meteorology and to some extent in cosmology, but also again in this idea of understanding the material sort of basis of all phenomena. So, moving on from Anaximenes, we will see in the rest of the philosophers that we will study. With with the Pythagoreans, we go in a somewhat different direction. We will still think about motion and things, but they go in a somewhat different direction. And then with Heraclitus, you will see the influence again of Anaximander, but also a step sort of sideways, let's say. So we will be looking at the influences, and then we've already talked about Empedocles and Anaxagoras, and then eventually the atomists, and Xenophanes, in a different way when he talks about the gods. And the critique of religion that Xenophanes would bring forward, we could trace some kind of an inception in the Milesian natural philosophy. So there are these three words that were used to describe the Milesians. To summarize, they are usually called in many different texts of history of philosophy. They're called rational. One of the words that's applied to them is rational, evolutionary, and monist. Right? Now, all these three words, we assume, are used in opposition to the kind of thought that came before, right? So, rationality as being something that began with these Milesians, it's a problematic view, and it's also a very particular understanding of rationality, and maybe it comes from a certain degree of confusion, because when we talk about the rationality, let's say, of Thales or Anaximander or Anaximenes as compared to the rationality of Homer and Hesiod, what exactly is a step forward? Is it simply the idea that earlier they were talking about myths and gods and all these poetic notions, and later then they started talking about science and phenomena and nature? It's not as clear cut. It's not simply a shift from myth and imagination to science and method. In fact, there isn't. That you will find as you saw, you will find this kind of a mythical, poetical element also in the later philosophers, and in earlier philosophers. You would find something naturalistic. Philosophers, if you want to think of it, or poets, Hesiod. You would find something which it is proto-cosmological. So what's the difference between, say, Hesiod and Anaximander, or Hesiod and Aximenes, when it comes to understanding cosmos, understanding the beginning of the world, the end of the world, the processes that go through in the world? They're asking similar questions. They're again asking, where did everything come from? How does change happen? Where is everything going? The difference is that, with the earlier philosophers, they would or rather with Hesiod, and Homer, they would give these nice explanations, but no justification. There's a kind of dogma involved there, right? This is how the gods were, and accept it. Sorry, I'm not going to justify it. And they might be sometimes extremely confusing, sometimes extremely irrational. You might have, some people, even the explanations can get, a bit sort of confused and, confusing. And that's where and without justification, you just accept it. You don't reason it out. Rationality is this process of reasoning things out, right? So what is significant, the significant change, let's say, from Hesiod's theogony is that, earlier there were these unjustified, unargued, stories. You had all these myths and stories and explanations via these mythical stories, which they did not give any argument or justification for, which then became replaced with, an argued theory, an argued structured explanation. This explanation may be good or bad, or some things that we are not convinced by, some things that we are more convinced by, but there was at least some attempt at providing justification for things. There was some attempt at providing, explanation for things. So we should not really equate reason with science. It's not that, science has like some kind of a overall grasp of reason and science is the only reasonable thing, or science is always reasonable, so long as rather think of reason as being more of a moving away from dogmatic acceptance towards argued understanding, towards things that are explained and argued and justified and then require further justification. This is something that you need to really sort of think of when we'll talk about rationality throughout. We'll talk about logos, logic. In fact, again, logos, as I said, logic is not something that was suddenly born. Rationality and logic. It's not that everything that came before these philosophers was irrational. Rather, with these philosophers, they came like a very strong attempt at justifying through means that could be understood by everybody and that could be recreated and could have predictive power to explain the cosmos, the world, its formation, its processes. So when we talk about rationality, what we do see with them is that when they're talking about the causes for the cosmos, for example, the causes that were operating in the beginning of the creation of the cosmos in their sort of explanations are the same that are operating now, right? So which means that it is argued that, just look, how you have condensation and rarefaction, for example, with Anaximenes. You have condensation and rarefaction now, and this is the condensation and rarefaction. The same process was there in the very beginning. You have heat, which is caused through swifter motion. You had that even earlier. So there is if there is any kind of a reaching out or extending our imagination, it is through things that we can still observe, which we can still try and justify with our current understanding of things. Which means that we are, as I said earlier, moving from mythology, from mythos towards logos, and moving towards nature, and trying to find natural explanations and naturalistic explanations, and which means that we are searching very seriously now for order under this chaos, chaos not in the Hesiod sense, but in the modern sense in which we use chaos, which came later with some use in Latin. This sort of search for order and search for order with justification, not simply search for a kind of taxonomy, which is what Hesiod presumably or arguably did was that he created, when he was trying to order things, he created actually a kind of taxonomy of the gods, that first was Gaia, first was chaos, and Gaia and Uranos, and then so he created a kind of hierarchical family tree, not that sort of order, but rather an order which comes from an understanding of a single natural process, which and of matter and material and natural processes, which we can observe and we can explain and we can justify. Right, so that is what would be meant by rational, right? This is a step forward, at least in sort of the history of ideas and in the history of scientific thinking, scientific thought. The second thing that they are called, as we said, was evolutionary. Now, not evolutionary in the modern sense in which we would understand it, but some element of that is there, which is why this term is used. So, when we say evolutionary with these early thinkers, what we mean is that nature herself has a power of generation, of evolution, of evolving, and nature, which is physis, which is matter really, because when we say nature, what we mean is hule, which is physis or hule, which is matter, material things that we find around us, which is alive, which is evolving, which is changing. So in that sense, it is evolutionary, and with Anaximenes at least, we also see a move towards mechanistic explanation, and it is mechanistic, evolutionary without involving teleology. The problem, what is teleology? It's something that we'll talk again and again about, so maybe I should introduce it now. The telos means end or aim or goal or the finishing line, right? So we could think of things changing, let's say, with a particular telos, or any action with a particular telos or aim. So why am I giving this lecture? With one of the aims is so that you can watch it at whatever time is convenient to you at home, right? Why did I sort of buy this piano stool? Is so that I could sit here and play the piano. So that's the idea of a telos. Now, if we think of the processes in nature as being teleological, what we are then assuming is that everything has a purpose. But then if things have a purpose, that means that there is a purpose that already exists, that is then directing these things, which then creates a break in this monism, right? And it makes it not evolutionary in a normal sense. It stops being evolutionary and it starts being teleological, because it's not just evolving in different ways, and it's not evolving in it's not evolving to new things that are unexpected. There's no emergent phenomena. If you think of it in terms of emergence, which we'll see with the atomists, for example, there are no new emergent phenomena that are coming out from. There are no new emergent phenomena, rather plural, which are coming out from this one state. That would be evolutionary. Teleological would mean that it's all pre-planned. There is a blueprint, and things happen because they want to follow that blueprint. And an example of this teleological thinking would be Aristotle, which we are not going to cover, but I'll talk about from time to time. So you can see already with Anaximenes that nature is acting in a mechanistic way. Even with Anaximander, even though there seems to be a kind of personality to the apeiron and to the different sort of opposites that are in the apeiron, they're still mechanistic in the sense that it's all governed by chance. It is governed by chance and by something in nature itself, in matter itself, in physis itself, which are chance-like. Chance and necessity, we'll talk about it later, by chance and necessity of things, and that is the cause of change. It's by chance, it's chance that is the cause of change, rather than a pre-planned, telos towards which everything is progressing. So that's why they are called evolutionary. If you think about the term evolutionary out here in terms of non-teleology and generative, self-generation of matter, and going towards new sort of circumstances governed by chance or tuke rather than by telos or an end goal in sight. And finally, which we have talked about quite a lot, is that they were monis, or the other word that was used was hylozoist, hule, matter, zoe, life, right? In the sense that matter itself was alive, and its alive matter was the only substance. There was no second thing that was required. There's no force that is required from outside to move this matter. So that means that life is inherent in matter, and what in Aristotelian terms, the efficient cause or the moving cause is identified with the matter or the body that is moved, right? So it's the same thing. It's a self-moving sort of process, which means that there is a unity of matter and motion with the Milesians, with these early first natural philosophers. There's a unity of matter and motion. So when we talk about matter, motion, and the cosmos, there is a unified moving matter that creates a cosmos through chance. It's a very sort of fascinating first idea, and it's a decisive move forward from the kind of system or the kind of understanding of cosmos that we saw in Homer or later Hesiod more clearly. So with these first philosophers, you already have now the setup of a kind of rational, in the sense of they will give justifications, they will give explanations, they will search for order, they would sort of try to find things that can be justified now and observed now, and then you have something that is somewhat evolutionary, in the sense that it is governed not by some pre-planned sort of structure, but by chance, governed by chance, and there is some kind of a generative power itself in nature which allows it to change and alter. And finally, this hylozoism, this aliveness of matter, this monism, which again then sort of combines matter and motion into one single thing. So in summary, this was a big decisive step of the Milesians. Thank you.